It may surprise you to learn that Marvel vs. Capcom 2's soundtrack, the insanely groovy funk jazz fusion juggernaut, the collection of bangers that we all know and love, the one that is gonna take you for a ride whether you like it or not, was critically panned upon release? Of course, nowadays we know better. With the benefit of hindsight, we can all see now that Marvel vs. Capcom 2's music slapped harder than Sean Connery when his dinner's late. But back in the early 2000s, people thought that this musical aesthetic belonged more in an elevator than a fighting game soundtrack. And to be honest, I can kinda see where the complaints of the time were coming from. It does seem a bit incongruous watching the Hulk grind Mega Man's face into the dirt to the sound of super funky bass fills. Especially in the year 2000, playing this game on mute, I'd expect the music to be filled with heavy metal guitar riffs. I'd think I'd be getting hit with some drop C or something, so to unmute the TV and find a completely clean MIDI guitar ripping bebop licks, it's a little jarring. This disconnect is because rock and metal communicate differently from funk and jazz. Fundamentally, the way that each type of music speaks to a listener is different, and fans of each genre judge them on completely different metrics. To most people of the time, the music seemed out of place, but to fans of funk and jazz, this music hit way more than hard enough. Even if you're a complete metalhead, the type of person who only uses the word funky to describe when food tastes like it's gone bad, you can see now that at the very least, Marvel vs. Capcom 2's music has stood the test of time. So, let's go through some of these tracks and see if we can't explain to a time-traveling fighting game nerd from the year 2000 what makes this soundtrack so great. Marvel vs. Capcom 2's soundtrack takes a lot from 80s Japanese jazz fusion, being written by Japanese composers Mitsuhiko Takano and Tetsuya Shibata, but it also borrows heavily from American funk music, and the most important thing in American funk music is rhythm. With the kinds of music that were big in the late 90s and early aughts, namely grunge and metal and hard rock, the goal of the rhythm is to make people's heads swing up and down in an arc-like motion as hard as possible. With funk jazz fusion, the goal of the rhythm is to make people's heads bounce forward and backward, almost like you're a chicken gobbling up corn. Bonus points if their faces look like they just smelled a cat turd while they're doing it. To an alien species coming down to study human behavior, it might seem like a very subtle difference, but if you've ever been to live shows of both of these kinds of music, you'll know what a drastic difference it is. And this difference in the emotional goal of the music, and by extension, the ideal physical response of the listener, requires a completely different approach to groove. In funk music, drive and energy is generated through the use of quick, syncopated 16th note rhythms. By syncopated, I mean the rhythm's accent notes that don't line up with the beat of the song just as much as they do accent notes that line up on the beat. You don't want a constant stream of 16th notes that would quickly turn into thrash metal. The rhythms have to make use of a 16th note subdivision but be broken up in an exciting way. A perfect example is the opening of the Carnival stage music. The tune starts with a bang, the whole band playing this rhythmic figure together on a B7 sharp 9 chord. Now this is a beautifully constructed rhythm. We start and end the phrase with a strong hit on a beat. The first beat gives us 16th notes to give some context for the rhythm, and the middle of the bar is filled in with accented offbeat 16th notes with nothing on the downbeats to ground them. It's like a trapeze artist walking on a tightrope. These offbeat rhythms make it feel like the music is in danger of falling apart at any second, but it sticks the landing perfectly. The amount of energy generated in such a short amount of time here is impressive. Now, imagine if we took out the syncopation and had these offbeat stabs placed on the strong beats of the bar instead. Oh no, I feel like I've committed a crime by doing that. Please, play it normal again so I can get the taste of that out of my head. Okay, thank you. Now, this kind of unison figure is a special case. 99% of the time in funk, these syncopated rhythms are going to be played out over top of a steady beat in the drums, and layered with other instruments playing different syncopated rhythms, each part interlocking in a satisfying way and working together to create the groove. Getting into the meat of this track, we can see there is quite a lot of stuff going on rhythmically. The guitar melody is interrupted by syncopated horn fills, the bass is going absolutely feral underneath, the organ is jumping in with more offbeats than downbeats, but the whole thing is tied together by the unshakable rock that is the snare drum landing on beats 2 and 4. Listen along and see how these interlocking rhythmic pieces weave together. I can't talk about the interlocking parts here without pointing you to the one extremely obvious influence on this soundtrack, and that's Tower of Power. Tower of Power is a funk band that's been active since the late 60s, and they've been rocking a one-of-a-kind sound that's been simultaneously hugely influential and completely uncopyable. The low Barry stabs and interlocking syncopated horn parts, the insanely busy but effortlessly funky bass lines, the fusion of funk and jazz harmonic concepts, this is all stuff ripped straight from Tower of Power. If you like Marvel vs. Capcom 2's soundtrack, go listen to Tower of Power's Drop It in the Slot. It's one of the best albums ever recorded by my estimation. Anyways, this kind of rhythmic concept requires a really careful balance between offbeats and onbeats. If the whole band was playing offbeats for the whole piece, we wouldn't even hear them as offbeats, we'd think they were playing straight downbeats. It's the rhythmic dissonance that comes from these accented offbeat rhythms laid over top of an established pulse that makes the music work. But also, it's not like the more offbeats you have, the better. If the melody to a tune was 100% offbeat sixteenths over top of a steady drum groove, this might feel cool for a second, but it would quickly become exhausting. To create a truly funky groove that feels good, the rhythmic dissonance of playing offbeat has to be treated the same way we treat dissonance in harmony. It can be used in tandem with consonance to tell a story. The factory stage theme features a climactic horn melody section that perfectly shows what I mean. Follow along and pay attention to where the horns are playing on the beat and where they're accenting offbeats. If we understand that offbeat accents create rhythmic tension and playing on the beat feels rhythmically consonant, we can see how the rhythm of this phrase tells a story. We start with a melody that's just quarter notes on each strong beat that ends with a quick 16th note flurry that ends on an offbeat. The next phrase uses the exact same rhythm, setting the scene and giving us something to recognize and latch onto. The following phrase ramps up the rhythmic dissonance, using several offbeat stabs in a row with no downbeats to ground them. This moves on to a phrase that accents the downbeat of the bar, but then moves on to several offbeat stabs. This rhythm is then repeated exactly in the next bar. This is a shorter phrase than every other one before it, being 1 bar long rather than 2. And quickening the pace of the melody like this is another way to build tension. This tension comes to a head at the very end with these syncopated stabs landing on 2 straight downbeats before releasing all of the tension of the section with one enormous note on beat 1 of the bar. Once your ear is attuned to how exciting this kind of rhythmic syncopation can be, it becomes clear how hard the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 soundtrack goes. We don't need super distorted guitars or low chugging riffs to generate energy. The freewheeling trapeze act of balancing all of these syncopated rhythms together and then bringing them to a satisfying resolution is way more hype than any metal riff. But that's not the end of it. The next element that makes this funky jazz fusion so appealing to those it appeals to is the bass. The bass guitar has made a massive PR recovery since the early 2000s, when hard rock radio ruled the roost. It's probably hard to believe for you younger viewers out there, but I remember a time where the bass was a profoundly uncool instrument. It was the worst guitar player in the band that got relegated to bass duty and had to slink back to the trailer and do a crossword after the gig while the guitar players picked up girls. But nowadays, the bass player is responsible for more stank face in the audience than any other member of the band. There's nothing that goes harder than a super tight, funky bass line. I really could go to any song on this soundtrack for an example, but let's look at the Clock Tower theme. Looking at this bass line here, we can see how it fulfills its role as the foundation of the band, giving a big fat root note of each chord on beat 1 of each measure. But we also see how busy the bass gets with choppy, syncopated rhythms, offbeats and anticipations of beats, and catching hits made by other instruments. This juggling act of supporting the music and creating excitement is what makes bass players the coolest members of any funk band. In fact, the rhythm of the bass line is really the key factor in the groove of this genre, I think, even more than what the drums are doing. The way the bass trades between offbeat stabs and strong, clear downbeats strikes a perfect balance, and this constant fluctuation of rhythmic consonance and dissonance is like an engine that drives the music forward. It's like how a harmonized melody in a choir or a big band saxophone section will feature tons of micro resolutions in the harmony underneath the broader net of whatever chord is supposed to be happening in each bar. There's a constant stream of micro resolutions in the rhythm of the bass line that gives the music life. There's more than just the rhythm to think about too. Pure funk music is built mostly on repeated riffs, sticking to one chord for long stretches at a time, but jazz funk fusion features more complex and colorful chord progressions taken from the jazz tradition. The bass needs to be able to elegantly navigate these changes, creating a counter melody that complements the main melody of the piece as well as providing a foundation for the harmony. But where a traditional jazz bassist needs to be able to do this in steady quarter note rhythm, what we call a walking bass line, the jazz funk bassist needs to do this while also ripping through these syncopated 16th note rhythms. In the River stage theme, the bass is pretty much driving the piece. The vocal melody floats on top, the electric piano holds down the chords in whole notes and half notes, the drums play a steady groove, all of them leaving plenty of space for the bass to go bananas at the bottom. For most listeners, the vocals are going to be the centerpiece of the arrangement. People are always drawn to a human voice more than any other instrument. But for this track, the music nerds will all be listening to the bass. A great rock bass player might lay down some heavy riffs or be able to play really fast, but nothing they do ever really comes close to what a funk bass player has to handle on every single tune. A great funk bass line is enough to rocket these tracks into the kind of super hype level of excitement that you need in fighting game music. We've talked a lot about the funk half of the jazz-funk fusion formula, and we can't bring up the jazz half without talking about the last element that I want to bring up today that makes the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 soundtrack so appealing, and that is the solos. Nothing gets a jazz musician hot quite like a good solo. Now, what makes a solo good? That is way too big and vague of a question to answer in this video. And actually, I have no clue what makes solos so appealing. They definitely are not appealing to people who haven't acquired the taste for them, but it's kind of like spicy food. If you've learned to appreciate a good solo, suddenly any music without them feels disappointing. One thing I can say is that a good solo develops some motivic idea from the main melody more robustly and with more inventiveness than you would ever get from a through-composed section. The Clock Tower theme has a simple 8-bar melody built around this tiny melodic figure, a walk-up and arpeggio into this long, short, dotted 8th to 16th note resolution. We land on a consonant note from the underlying chord, here a G note over a G minor chord, but the first beat of the measure is emphasizing the note a step above where we want to land. This is called an appoggiatura, and it's a really emotionally powerful melodic move. We can see how this idea gets carried through each phrase, being changed slightly every time, but always with that original figure at the core of what's happening. I'll mark out some of the ways the melody gets transformed so you can follow along while it plays. It's a simple phrase, but it feels so satisfying hearing it get stretched out and twisted around like that. When the guitar solo comes in, it continues to develop that same motif. Especially at the start, you can see the same rhythmic dotted 8th to 16th idea hitting the note above a chord tone and then resolving down, just like in our main melody. But these ideas spiral off into new directions, incorporate new ideas, and put twists on the original rhythms and contour of the melodic line until it's almost unrecognizable. Almost. If you look for it, you can see connections to the original figure even after all of the melodic wandering that's gone on toward the end of the solo. With improvisations, you get a much wilder and freer development of ideas than you would get with a written out section. It's almost like the modern equivalent to classical music's theme and variations pieces, but way more exciting. Of course, it's not just about melodic development, it's also about creating intensity and telling a musical story, and also it's about playing sick lines. This keyboard solo from the factory stage theme is only 8 bars long, but it has a perfect arc and some really, truly disgusting lines. We start with a big help note that rolls out into this cool D minor pentatonic phrase. Then the next phrase starts low and works its way into the high register with this giant arpeggio, creating a bunch of drama. These two phrases set up the expectation of a series of 2-bar phrases with a little break in between. So when the following phrase starts in an even higher register and works its way down with winding chromatic lines and this quick 16th note triplet rhythm, we expect the phrase to end at the end of this bar. Instead, the phrase keeps moving, winding back up the scale with added chromatic approach notes and this great, super strange 5-note accent grouping, building up a wild intensity to the line before it explodes into this sextuplet chromatic scale to finish, bringing us barreling into the horn melody that we analyzed earlier. Whew, okay, now let's listen to the whole thing. We got led on a journey with twists, turns, accents popping out where you didn't expect them, and a perfect resolution of tension. What more could you ask for? Improvised solos like this also actually make perfect sense with video game music. The music has to loop to be able to go for as long as the game needs it to go, and soloing over a looping form is a really easy way to extend a piece of music without having to add any new compositional ideas to it. But now that leads us to the question, are these solos improvised? The music is all clearly being synthesized with MIDI instruments, but while the instruments sound fake, the solos sound so human that I would be shocked if they weren't actually performed on a synthesizer loaded up with whatever patch they decided on using at the time. The solo is the ultimate divide between jazz fans and metalheads. If you're in the metal camp, the idea that a MIDI saxophone line can sound heavy probably sounds downright stupid, but go into it with the right headspace and try to resist how sick this run is. Okay. So, to wrap it all up, with a deadly combination of funky rhythms, ludicrous bass lines, and shredding solos, we get a super hot soundtrack to remember. And that's why, objectively, Marvel vs. Capcom 2's music kicks ass. Take that, reviewers from 25 years ago. It's actually really interesting to think about how musical tastes change over time. There were people who dug funk back in the early 2000s, and I'm sure there are still people who think it sucks, but the overall trend of general public perception of the genre has changed so much, even just in my lifetime. Certain musicians and bands have presented what's cool about this kind of music in a way that connects with modern listeners, and after getting acclimatized to it in these contexts, people can now go back and listen to older music in that style and be able to hear why it feels good in a way that they just couldn't appreciate before. Big thank you to patron Chris Sabjan for the suggestion on Patreon. If you want to join Chris in supporting the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.